This week in IT. As Microsoft completes its EU data boundary project, Bert Hubert tells the Register that Microsoft 365 is a geopolitical risk for Europe under Trump 2.0. Admins get new Copilot feedback controls, and Microsoft introduces new Tenant outbound email limits in Exchange Online. So stay tuned for all the latest news. Welcome to This Week in IT, the show where I talk about everything connected to Microsoft 365, Azure, and Windows. But before we get started, I've got a quick favor to ask you. About 53% of the people who watched last week's video weren't subscribed to the channel. Now, as we go live today, we're on 11,220 subscribers, and I'd love it if we could push that up to 11,250 this week. So if you'd like to see these weekly news roundups from Petri.com, then please subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to hit the bell notification to make sure that you don't miss out on the latest uploads. I came across this really interesting article in the Register this week, and considering everything that's going on in the world right now, I thought it would be really interesting to cover it on today's episode. Now, essentially, this story stems from the fact that European governments are starting to worry about their dependency on US-based clouds, and the article specifically mentions Microsoft 365, and the Register did an interview with a guy called Bert Hubert, who is a Dutch technologist and technical advisor to the Dutch Electoral Council. Now, this all started because he published an article on his own website, and the Register picked this up and decided to speak to Bert to get a little bit more depth on what he was saying. Now, before I tell you about what I think about all of this, here's the short version of what Bert had to say. It is madness to continue transferring the running of European societies and governments to American clouds. Not only is it a terrible idea, given the kind of things the King of America keeps saying, the legal sophistry used to justify such transfers, like the nonsense letter the Dutch cabinet sent last week, has now been invalidated by Trump himself. And why are we doing this? Convenience. But it is very scary to make yourself 100% dependent on the goodwill of the American government merely because it's convenient. So let's not. Now, I was thinking about this a little bit this week, and there are many other things connected to this maybe that are going on in the world. And, you can think about things like defense and business. And of course, this is all connected to business, what he's talking about right now. But there are a couple of things that have essentially prompted all of this. Now, essentially, the Dutch government have been looking into all of this issue with data privacy and security connected to their own government clouds, and they'd actually hired they'd also got into this little internal argument about whether it was a good thing to do or not, and of course they'd essentially convinced themselves, as I think Europe tends to do quite a bit, yeah, this is kind of okay, it's all going to be fine. So they actually ended up not agreeing on that conclusion and sent a letter to a legal firm in New York and said, well, at the end of the day, if we were doing all of our business in Microsoft 365 and the American government decided they wanted access to our email, would Microsoft be obliged to essentially hand over that information? And the legal firm in New York, a top legal firm, said essentially, Microsoft would have no choice. There would be no ifs or buts about it. They would get access to your email. Now, I was scratching my head a little bit about this because there was that famous case already many years ago now, I think it was, where Microsoft essentially fought the American government to stop having to hand over, I think it was some email data as well, that was stored in a tenant that was in a data center based in the Republic of Ireland, which of course is in the European Union. And if I remember correctly, Microsoft did eventually win that case and they fought that battle. So it's interesting to see the turnaround now of this legal opinion that essentially this legal firm believes that Microsoft would essentially be forced just to do whatever the government tells them to do. Now, of course, we've seen all of this kind of stuff play out in the States recently with, it seems, at least from the European side of things, that Trump and Musk just seem to have carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want without much consequence for anything that they decide. So that was an interesting tidbit of information there. So he also referenced some other things in his letter. One was that, going back to World War II, that the Dutch government had essentially bought a whole load of weapons from Germany, which were not delivered in the way that they had expected. And then, of course, World War II broke out. He also highlighted a case with a Dutch bank that had been subpoenaed by the Dutch government. But what actually happened was that the Dutch government said to Microsoft, well, we need to get some information about this bank so that we can wind the business down. But what actually happened was that the US government then subpoenaed the bank and basically told Microsoft, no, you're under sanctions now, you cannot hand over any information about this bank to the Dutch authorities. So that wrangling went on for a very long time, backwards and forwards. Eventually, some kind of agreement was reached. But as you can imagine, if you can't get hold of the information that's used to run a business, even if it's, been subpoenaed and is going to be wound down, then that causes a whole load of potential problems and potentially even closure and bankruptcy for a business. So that is all quite concerning. Now, Microsoft is making a push for governments and businesses to move their data and their operations to Microsoft 365 by October 2025, because I believe that Office 2016 and 2019 are no longer going to be supported by that date. So there's a bit of a push from Microsoft on that. And that's not to say that that's the only option available for governments and businesses in the EU, of course. But, it's just coming into people's minds at this time. And, well, what could we do about this? Well, I think personally that it would be a great idea to build out its own cloud data centers and solutions initially for government. Now, that might sound like something that's impossible to do, but I don't think it's impossible to do. It just requires a will and for the European Union to really develop a backbone. Because from where I'm sitting, it all really looks like we don't really have any guts to challenge the states to build our own technology. But many of the developers and the brains behind all of these technologies come from Europe. So potentially we have the talent, the skills, the knowledge to do these things, but there just doesn't seem to be the political backbone to actually make these things happen. Wouldn't it be great if the European Union could start sponsoring projects to build out cloud and productivity solutions, maybe initially for government to reduce reliance on US-based technologies, and then eventually make those solutions available for business as well. Now, of course, probably they should be built based on open technologies, and they should be built so that they interoperate with things like Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, whatever other solutions they need to connect to. I think that's all perfectly possible to do. So yes, would this be difficult and painful? Probably yes. Does Europe need to do it? I think that it does, just like it needs to do many other things for itself and not rely on the US for almost everything, it seems, in every aspect of our lives. We just rely too much. And, to be honest, Russia is doing this. I'm not a fan of Russia, but Russia is doing this. So then I think the EU can definitely do it as well. If corporations like Soho can build out their own productivity solutions, their own little clouds, why can the EU not do the same thing? Let me know in the comments below what you think about European dependency on US-based technology. I'm going to cover this one very quickly because I know lots of people don't have access to Microsoft 365 Copilot, but Microsoft has released a new feature this week that is going to allow administrators to basically send feedback about Copilot on users' behalf. So they'll be able to review the data before it gets sent back to Microsoft to remove anything sensitive. And really, again, this is to help try and alleviate fears that users could be sending potentially sensitive corporate data back to Microsoft as part of their feedback. So it's designed to help encourage feedback, but also give administrators the control to make sure that sensitive data is not being sent at the same time. Probably in slightly more relevant news for most of you, Microsoft is releasing an update to Exchange Online called Tenant-Wide External Recipient Rate Limit, okay, TERL for short. Now, the idea of this is to essentially stop users abusing the Exchange Online service to send out emails on a massive scale. So they're going to be limiting this to 5,000 emails per 24-hour period as the kind of baseline for most organizations. For those that are paying more for their subscriptions, that limit will be increased. But essentially, this is designed to stop organizations abusing Exchange Online and to preferably push them to use more appropriate services that are designed to send email in bulk. It's worth noting that this rollout is going to start actually on March the 3rd. So if you're a small tenant and you have 25 users or less, then this is going to be rolling out to you on March the 3rd. And Microsoft says this will be completed by March 31st. So Microsoft says that if you're looking for a solution to send more than 5,000 emails a day, then you should be looking at something like Azure Email Communication Services or Exchange Online High Volume Email. Microsoft says there are going to be new reports to monitor email usage in terms of how many emails are getting sent a day in the Exchange Admin Center, and the PowerShell commandlet get limits enforcement status so that you can monitor what kind of throughput you have on your email and whether you potentially need to investigate one of these other bulk email services. If you found this video useful, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up because it helps to get the video seen by more people on YouTube and to grow the channel. I'm going to leave you with another video on the screen now about a new technology that Microsoft says is going to push forward quantum computing and hopefully make it more widely available, commercially useful in a much shorter time frame than we'd previously expected. So do check that out. But that's it from me this week, and I'll see you next time.